Hey everybody, this is Christopher Haylett, aka The Nerdy Christian, with another Lunch and Learn episode. Today I'm going to be recapping and critiquing my own side in a debate on whether the Western culture is superior to all other cultures. So a quick recap, the Nerdy Christian channel is for kind of fun culture and media stuff, Christian faith, theology, and scriptural stuff, world affairs, economics, political science, all that kind of stuff, just nerding out about all those things, and then the interplay of all of those things. And so, hence today, this recap of this debate that I was in. I was thinking the other day about Jordan. So I had this debate, and I was thinking about like Jordan Peterson, Charlie Kirk, like all these different people that you'll see different debates of. Like, how cool would it be if you one time got to see them like get on and like rewatch their own debate and kind of add to points, and also critique their own points or critique parts that they didn't say what they meant to say or should have said. Like, I think that'd be interesting. And so I was like, you know what? How about we do something like that on our next Lunch and Learn episode? So here we are. We had some audio difficulties, so starting from square one right now. But let's go ahead and start this episode and dive into it. Just a quick note, I'll be playing the original video on 2 times, just for the sake of time. And you guys just let me know in the chat if it's going too fast. But yeah, let's go.
Video. Hello everyone, white colonizer here. Just letting you guys know that I think the greatest thing the West has done.
Just a quick clarify. This is the video that kicked this off. That this debate is in response to then.
At least one of the greatest things the West has done in the modern period is the utter erasure of the Native American culture, society, and influence. And no, I don't mean the people, because genocide's bad. Don't do genocide. But the West comes in. This is, hey guys, you're still doing this whole human sacrifice bit. Kind of a hot take. What if you stopped? Additionally, I notice you're worshiping plants and trees and rocks and deer, but the rest of the world moved on from the Bronze Age about 3,000 years ago, so it wouldn't be grand if you joined us in modernity. Additionally, this land that you've had for millennia, that you've done nothing with, we're going to take it, and we're going to build things on it that are going to promote human life and flourishing, like hospitals and transportation and commercialized farms. And no, I don't care that the spirit of your great-great-grandfather is still wandering the plains in a bison. I'm going to shoot that bison and turn it into a hamburger. Not all cultures are created equal. Western society, Western culture is superior, which is why it's lasted for such a long time. And the irony here is, the only culture where you could even appreciate subpar, archaic, demonic, evil cultures is the West. Because in the West, we have this liberal freedom of thought and speech that even allows you to have stupid opinions.
One correction I need to make to that.
Sure.
It was the Stone Age, not the Bronze Age.
Okay. So, all right. So now that we have a good context and that we have a good correction to the original, which, I mean, agree or disagree, the video's hilarious. Your comedic timing. We're going to shoot that bison and turn him into a burger. If you're an American, I don't care. You love that. But yeah, I know that my buddy Nerdy Christian over here had some words and some thoughts about it. So if you wouldn't mind just like rebutting and giving your opinion on what you just heard, Nerdy Christian, then we'll just go from there.
Yeah. So I tried to really do like point by point. There's a lot of different points in there, right? But really, my biggest concern with it is synonymizing Western culture with Christianity, with the kingdom of heaven, right? Which Western culture has in large part been inhabited by the kingdom of heaven. And actually, John, I think we are closer to this than you might think, like closer together on this than you might think, because like I'm a big fan of Tom Holland and his work in Dominion, and like what he says about how the world was sanitized, largely morally sanitized by Christianity, which grew to the world through the vehicle of the West. But the distinction that I want to make is like Western culture itself actually had like some really problematic pieces in that. And then also just factually, I was like, I don't know. I think building a city of not of aqueducts, but a city on a lake, like Tenochtitlan, pretty advanced. Or like the human sacrifice bit. Well, some of the South American and Central American tribes practiced it. Aztecs, Mayans, Incas. Mostly they were seen, those empires. I can't speak so much to Incas because I'm not as familiar, but they were seen as extremely oppressive by most other indigenous groups. And that's actually part of why Cortez was able to overthrow Tenochtitlan, because he just had a few dozen Spaniards, but he was able to get thousands of other indigenous people who were like, they're sacrificing tens of thousands of us a year. We're done with them, right? And my biggest issue, aside from synonymizing the West with Christianity, was synonymizing all indigenous culture, period, where there's thousands of different groups as kind of these very broad strokes. And so I guess that's kind of what the discussion can be. Or
Sure. I mean, before you give your answer to that, John, I always thought it was pronounced Tenochtitlan. I never knew how to pronounce that
I tried
correct.
to say yesterday. I was like, so
yeah, that's tough one.
Mexico City.
Yeah. What do you think, John?
So I'm going to start in the micro and then take it to the macro, because I don't think the issue has anything to do with Indians. But in the micro, it's undebatable that they were a primitive, unadvanced, in many cases uncivilized people group across the North American continents, North American, South American continent. There's just no debating that. What people will often do, because I watched a lot of opposition content, like, what people say, what are the arguments for this culture? What do people say about this culture? And the most advanced inventions I would hear, well, they invented moccasins. Like, okay, well, it's leather wrapped around your foot. It's not really an invention. Or someone said they invented canoes. Europeans didn't have canoes. Like, oh, they're building battleships. So I think they kind of skipped over the canoe. And that's just the fact of it, is when the Spanish arrived in Mexico City, and the most advanced that the Indian world had to offer, they were finally smelting bronze, which, if we'll do our math here, is about 3,500 years late. And then North America was in the Stone Age. They hadn't even invented or come to that point in human history where they're smelting iron ore, bronze ore, making metals. And what people will often do is they will point to one civilization or one tribe that maybe had some kind of unique cultural advancement that the other tribes didn't have and say, look, they're super advanced. It's like, well, you don't have to do that with European nations. In Europe, the West, or I shouldn't say Europe, but Europe and the West have become synonymous since about the late modern period. But in the West, you didn't have to do that because every city had those inventions. Every city had those advancements. It occurred across the world. So it wasn't like I don't have to pick one city and say, hey, look, these guys were unique. They had advancements. They all did. So yeah, I'm sure there was some nation that had some cool thing that was kind of comparable to something that the West had. But in all of those cases, it's a one-off. It's like, wow, that's interesting. They had something like that. At the end of the day, they were unadvanced people, an unadvanced civilization. And there's folks will point to dumb luck, or they'll point to, well, certain geographic or ecological factors. And there's nothing that can excuse them, naturally speaking, of the fact that the rest of the world had advanced, had moved on to later time periods, and they were still in the Stone Age. And we can come back to that later and discuss that more if it's interesting. But the macro here is Western society and Western culture, and how it is a superior and dominant culture in the United States. And Chris said that Western culture and Christianity are two separate things. And definitionally, yeah, but practically they're not. Because if we believe God is sovereign, which Matt, you said you're Calvinist, so we're big sovereignty guys. Mm-hmm. There's perfect wills of God. There's the good will of God. There's the acceptable will of God. And when you look through the time of human history, the passages of time, you have to believe as a Christian, not just as a Calvinist, but that God is sovereign through everything. And God, I think it's Psalm 76 says that God uses even the wrath of man to glorify him. So the vessel, as Chris said, that God chose to propagate Christianity throughout the entire world was the West. People say, well, there are early African churches. Like, well,
important distinction there. And I didn't interrupt him because this is his monologue, right? But in this I can interrupt him, is, okay, God uses the wrath of man. That does not mean that God ordains the wrath of man. And this is a key distinction that I think a lot of Calvinists, in my opinion, fall victim to, is rationalizing things that God permits, God that as God's sovereign expression. So God is sovereign. He does not express his sovereignty in all things. He permits many things that go against even his perfect will, his will for men, his will for humans. Now, does he work all things out for the good of those who love him according to his purpose? Yes, that's literally in the Bible. But does that he works all things out for good? That's like the language used there, meaning he's not like making all these little pieces and details happen. He's working with humans, and he's sovereign in that he knows what will happen and all this, right? We could get into Molinism and provisionism and all of these different things. That's not what this video is about, but I think I'm going to have a fundamentally different worldview to some extent than any Calvinist, because to me, it's very important to note that the sovereignty of God does not denote that everything that's ever happened was by God's design. So, just saying.
Well, actually, hold on, because you look at the Ethiopian church, they only received Christianity in the 4th century through a Western evangelist. All of the North African churches that started, Carthage and not Antioch, but all of those North African churches, Tunisia, that was part of the West because the Romans had controlled North Africa since the BC 300s, after the Carthaginian Wars with Hannibal. So every good you can point to of Christianity propagating throughout the world was through the West. So again, you can say, wow, that's crazy, it's a coincidence. Or you can realize, hold on, God's sovereign, and he chose the West, and he pulled the West up and said, you guys are the people I'm going to use to spread my gospel throughout not only the West, but the world. Because the Spanish brought the gospel to the Indians, the evangelists brought the gospel out east to the Chinese, to the Japanese, to the Eastern Indians. So it's, again, we can say that was just a coincidence, which denies the sovereignty of God, or we can recognize and realize, hold on, God chose the West for a reason. And a study of history, and I won't monologue, you cut me off anytime here, I'm going until I run out of ideas. But God, if you look at the course of human history, everything from antiquity past was setting the stage for the spread of the gospel. I mean, you start with Socrates, who basically invented this idea of natural law, that there is a law that undergirds all of humanity, and it's given by a divine creator. And Socrates was monotheistic, and even Justin Martyr thinks that Socrates might have been a Christian, actually, because he speaks of an inner voice that guides him throughout his life. And then he teaches Plato, Plato teaches Aristotle. Aristotle teaches Alexander the Great, who unites the early West and Hellenistic culture that all speaks Greek. People not all speak the same language. What happens after Alexander the Great dies and falls a few hundred years later, the Roman Republic becomes the Roman Empire under Julius Caesar. Now you have Pax Romana under Caesar Augustus. The world's peaceful now. The gospel can spread. Evangelists can travel unmolested on these Roman roads to an entire world that speaks the same language. How did this happen? Well, God was setting the stage through all of these actors and all of these figures to create the prime, like a petri dish, where the gospel can spread and multiply. That was only possible because of the achievements, the accomplishments of Western leaders and Western figures. And
sorry, I think this would be a good spot to
yeah, absolutely.
Chris.
Before we get into what I said, here's some points I should have made. God does that with every culture. God prepares in his sovereignty, God prepares hearts in every culture for the gospel as it's brought to them, as it's being brought to them, right? And this lineage of Christianity is not the one that Paul draws. Paul draws Christianity's lineage in Romans to the people of Israel, which I think is really important. Like, if you take away the lineage from the people of Israel and give it to the Greeks, that's problematic. Very problematic. As a Christian with the Old Testament and all we have there, and just also as just a person avoiding some anti-Semitist tropes and stuff, anti-Semitic tropes and stuff. The law that God gave to the Hebrews is what prepared the way for the gospel of Christ, not common law or whatever, like developed by Socrates and Plato and all of them, they helped Greek hearts, and Western hearts were in part prepared by this advanced work that God had done. But was this like the beginning of Christianity? No. This was not the beginning of Christianity. It was the beginning of a specific culture and people's exposure to the work of God in their society to prepare their hearts for the gospel, in my opinion. And that happens with every culture that encounters the gospel.
There's the opportunity to respond to. So what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, so I immediately think of Joseph and his brothers, and when Joseph says, "What you meant for evil, God used for good," and so because God used the West in amidst of it, I'm not condemning the West as entirely evil. I'm so over the like super anti-Western, everything the Europeans did was bad kind of narrative. It's lame. It's just not nuanced and simple. But when the West introduces things like the international slave trade, I shouldn't say introduces because the Arab slave trade around the east coast of Africa was very prolific. But when they bring the transatlantic slave trade, or when they kill off a ton of Native Americans, and not only directly do so, disease killed the vast majority, which we need to note too. But when they do some of these things, this is not just a lump sum. Well, people, the gospel spread, so everything, all of it was positive, or all of it was better than all of what they had. And I just want to pop a little further back to the micro that you mentioned before. I think the comparison of the new world and the old world is almost like comparing if we went to another entire planet and there's a population comparable to the size of that on Earth, but their materials, their technology, everything is different. And to us, it seems primitive, but they have high quality of life. They have high populations that are sustained by technologies they have that meet the needs of their society. I don't think we could say, well, they're primitive. Like if they have a higher population than ours, they might be doing something right. Similarly, Tenochtitlan had a population that was like, I believe, I mentioned it in the video, I don't remember off the top of my head, but at the time, London was like 30,000 and Tenochtitlan was like 200,000. Where do those figures come from?
From historians who estimate the size based on.
Indians kept no written history.
No, not then. Yeah, this is based on record from them and from archaeological record.
They didn't keep a record
from the Spanish, and from the. I never get back to my point here. Point of critique to past me. Don't get drawn off your point by someone second guessing the facts or the way the evidence of the facts. You can speak to that later, but there was a lot of room left. I never got back to this. There was a lot of room to talk about the alternatives, like obsidian, and the duality, the way in which the old world and the new world just were two entirely different worlds, using entirely different materials, using entirely different technologies, oftentimes to accomplish the same purposes. You don't need a steel knife if you have an obsidian knife. It kind of does the same thing. Obsidian surgical tools are still used today. So obsidian and flint was specially utilized and worked with in many Mesoamerican societies. And that's kind of what I should have been emphasizing here, and should have continued my point in, and should not have been drawn off of my point into this rabbit trail of why it's even reliable history. Similarly, they didn't have horses. The Inca had alpacas. We can get into this comparison game all day, but the fact of the matter is just that it was literally a different world. It was called the New World for a reason, because to the people of that time it was an entirely new world. And comparing, I later say, comparing these is like comparing apples and oranges and blaming the apples for not making orange juice. And that's the core point that I should have maintained footing on here. So anyways, we'll continue.
Archaeology based on the populations, archaeology would have. The Spanish didn't arrive in North America until the 15th century, the 17th century in some cases. The Tenochtitlan you're referencing is in Ohio. Spanish were never there, and they did not keep.
Sorry, Tenochtitlan is the Mexico City one. That other one is the La Joica, I believe it's La Joica, and that is based off of archaeological records. So like if there's X amount of. Just quick correction on my of me is it's the Cahokia people, not the La Joica people. But yeah, just the facts matter, okay? Seemingly housing units, you can surmise, okay, the population seems to have been, at that time I believe that one was that was way earlier. That was I think in like the 500s.
So that's based off more of archaeological evidence rather than
written. Archaeological evidence is more like archaeological hints and signposts that point us to things. Evidence is, okay, we have the census we pulled out of the ground and it says this many people. A bunch of guys come together and says others, there's 1,000 pots here. That probably means there were 3,000 people. It's not evidence. It's things that point us towards, okay, maybe there was this many people.
Can I push back on that? I mean, I'm curious why you're dismissing that as evidence.
Well, again, we're pulling the micro here. It's not evidence because evidence is something that says this thing happened here. What archaeologists uncovering a civilization, like, there was probably this many people here. We're not sure. We don't know, but it looks like it. At the end of the day, when the Europeans got here in everywhere from Christopher Columbus to the broad mass migration that took place during the 17th century, there were no massive, enormous civilizations. Like Mexico City was the largest, but there weren't these sprawling metropolises all over North America. They didn't exist.
Yeah. So can I just interject real quick? I'll just say, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure it's a good position to take to say that something is not evidence, because I understand data, like evidence to be data that supports a claim. So
written evidence is
Well,
one form of
that's why
Yeah.
we're arguing for this. So what difference does it make? And again,
No, just
that's why
definitionally. Just
we
definitionally.
get pushed into the micro a little too bit here. So let me just
Yeah.
step back. What's the point of arguing? Okay, so the city was 20,000, it was 100. Again, what difference does that make?
So
And
you're arguing, so like your argument is Western culture was inherently superior, more advanced, all this stuff. And my problem is if we're saying that 1890s US with people working 70-hour weeks and horrific pollution and stuff like in New York, if we're saying that is better than say, well, you're positing that Western culture as it was just because it was more industrialized.
No, Western culture is it's a point to the early industrial revolution, or maybe the late industrial revolution, as like a pinnacle of Western society. Absolutely not. No, I've never said that. The argument I've made this entire time is that Western society and its values and its morality, and like again, step back here. How to put this? The idea. Let's focus on let's talk about natural law, right? Natural law, which undergirds which.
I should not. He weasels out here. The point I was making is the comparison. The point being made is that technological comparison is a valuable tool of evaluation of cultural value. It's a good measure. And I'm pointing out in the first place, one, why comparing these technologies just doesn't work. And two, why even at that comparison they lose. And now he shifts the conversation to natural law. And I let it happen. Stupid me. I need to get better at steering. So this being my first debate of this sort, people will try to steer the conversation in certain ways. Hold people's feet to the fire. When they're making a bad point, finish this point first. Force them to okay, yes, okay, no, but don't just, now off to the next thing, right? That's point taken for me and just something that I needed to learn. And now let's get into natural law.
Humanity, something that was invented by the Greeks in 4th, 5th century BC. So this idea that you can travel to other lands and you both share the same law, and even though they have different civil laws than you do, you both share the same morality because you're both human. And you mentioned the transatlantic slave trade, which was kind of a drive-by. Slavery was a human concept; it was not a Western concept. So when you point to the evils, quote unquote, that the West has perpetrated, you have to ask: is that a product of the West, or is that a product of humanity that the West, as members of humanity, partook in? Because when you ask people who ended the transatlantic slave trade, well, that was the West. And in fact, if you want to talk about Indian tribes were perpetrating chattel slave trade 3-4 years after the end of the Civil War. It was like 1868.
Some Indian tribes.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if some or not. No, it doesn't.
No. Wait, I'm going to push back on this so hard.
Wait a second. Let John finish, and then
It doesn't matter if it was some or not, because when I point to the West shares these values. So there's no point in going tribe by tribe and saying, well, these guys are good, and these guys are bad, and these guys are good, and these guys are bad. The culture that united them, because nowadays we talk about Native culture, Native Americans as a homogenous, as a one giant coag. And I realize that that's not completely fair because there were distinctions among tribes and things like that. But again, the idea here is can a culture, the macro here, can a culture be inherently better than another culture? And you want to point to the one-offs of Western culture, saying, look, slave trade, or look, genocide here, or whatever. But then you're also doing the same thing, but in the reverse, because then you're going to the Indians and you're saying, well, yeah, human sacrifice and yeah, animism, but look, they built canoes, or they had a city that was big.
They had terrorist farming that supported a population 3 times the size of.
You can't do it both ways.
Chris, wait a minute,
He's got a lot of
yeah, I know what you're getting at, Chris. But I like that John summarized his position well. He said, we're looking at which culture is objectively more, I guess we can use the word superior. That's what the word you're using, right, John? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of data points we have to look at, and how we come to that conclusion. So, all right, go ahead, Chris, and you can respond to that premise, I guess.
We're painting with broad brushes here. If you told a 15th century Spanish person that their culture was the same as English, they'd shoot you.
No, not necessarily. If you said they came from the same Western roots, they'd agree with you. Because both the Spaniard and the British, or the Englishman, they both read Cicero, Plato, and they both read all this. They wouldn't disagree with you in saying that their culture originates from the same fathers.
That is correct. They have a similar root. But just as you can't really say that the Iroquois Confederacy had the same culture as the Aztec Empire, you can't say that Spain and the now United Kingdom and Russia as various members of the West. I don't know how far you include the definition of the West.
Russia's the East.
Okay, so
Western in a lot of respects, but considered by most historians to be the East.
Okay, so depending on where you consider the lines drawn, there are very different practices, even especially between Protestant and Catholic across the 14th to 18th centuries. Like slavery was, the Pope made moves against slavery actually far before Protestants. So Protestants actually carried on slavery to a much larger degree later than a lot of Catholic states, because the Pope had been like, no, this is not cool. So I don't.
Correcting myself on that front. One, I'm not Catholic, so I'm not trying to be pro-Catholic here or anything. I'm just trying to adhere to the facts of history. The Pope had 2 papal bulls pronounced against slavery. One fairly early on, around I think the 1500s. I fact-checked myself on this, and another one later on, 200 or 300 years later, that did essentially say hey, this is not okay. However, the Catholic states, particularly Spain and Portugal, followed those bulls to varying degrees, and even after they legally outlawed, so Spain participated with Great Britain in outlawing slavery in, I believe, 1817, and even after they legally outlawed it, it was still altogether, and not just domestic slavery, because that was outlawed first in Spain and Portugal. Even after they outlawed it altogether, it was still engaged in illegally for a very long time in Cuba and other kind of Spanish territories. So kind of a wash here, but the point is that Christendom properly recognized, at least on the Catholic side, properly recognized, at least intellectually, that this is wrong and shouldn't happen. Did human behavior always match up to that? And that's kind of my point, is that you can't tie Christianity and the ideals and the ways of Christianity to these very human cultures as synonymous, because the human cultures will never live up to Christendom. That's my point. Let's continue.
I think this uniformity of Western culture and defining it as in such a way where all elements of Western culture are all superior to all elements of all indigenous cultures.
I don't think I said that.
Seems problematic.
No, I don't think I said that. I think what you might be pointing towards here is the myth of the noble savage, that before, the West arrived, they were, these lovely people that camped and ate berries.
He says this so many times, and I do not. I'm like, was there warfare? Yes. Was it at the scale of warfare in other places in the world? Actually, yes, in Mesoamerica, no, in North America. That's the whole point. These are complex, multiple groups of people. Anyways, let's continue.
And sang songs around the campfire, and that's been debunked. So many times by so many historians.
That's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at the fact that Benjamin Franklin had the leaders of the Iroquois Confederacy come inform their creation of the early United States documents. So you're arguing that all good came from the West and fed anything good in the indigenous cultures. I'm trying to argue that indigenous cultures, one, had unique value that in the technologies and things that they taught Westerners that allowed them to survive.
Can you name a technology?
Terrace farming.
I made a good point there, and I got moved off of it so fast, and that's something where I should have said, like, wait, let's talk about culture as more than technology. And at the end, I got a little flustered. I'm like, we're talking about technology again. The point is that I was trying to make here, that I should have held on to, is every culture has something of value to offer, and that's good. That's how we were made. That's there is value in all people, all cultures, all nations, and there's also horrific stuff within all people, right? That's just the nature of man, and the image of God, and the dueling of those things. And anyways, all of that to say, the point should have continued to be emphasized. We gained federalism largely from the example of the Iroquois Confederacy, where there was the Confederacy as a whole, but then also different layers and levels of governance among the 5 different or 6 different Iroquois people groups that were in this Confederacy. Or not I don't know if they all identified as Iroquois or if they were under the umbrella kind of the Iroquois. There was the Mohawk peoples and other specific tribes, but that is a point. This is the biggest lesson I took away from this, is like, when I make a point, I need to force the conversation to stay on it when it's being made. I'm happy to go into someone else's point and of argument after, but you gotta have your not barriers, what's the parameters? I don't know, I'm blanking on the term, but you gotta have your boundaries of, this is the point of conversation at the moment. We'll get to that, but let's do proper justice to this point. Anyways,
the use of fish as fertilizer in the Northeast, various other elements like construction techniques. There's a lot of things that allow them to survive.
Construction techniques. So two technologies, both agricultural.
Which is a big piece, because that's how they had a population 3 times that one in the different spot. I think you're ignoring the fact.
Why did I get off of that so fast? Why? Agricultural, and the Plymouth, colonists would not have survived the winters most likely without the techniques that Squanto and Samoset taught them. That's in grade school. I think I learned that in 3rd grade about Squanto and stuff, right? And it's romanticized and whatever, but it's also true. And I don't know. Oh man, I let him get me off that point, and that was stupid because that was a good point to emphasize, to nail home. And that's the theme of this debate, is I get flustered and get pulled off of points every time I have something good. And that's a lesson learned for me, is no, when you have a good point, stick to it for at least a moment and don't let someone just pull you off of it. So we'll continue.
That 90% of the population was wiped out across the Americas largely before any white men reached anywhere. That's archaeological evidence. Again, we have evidence that seems to show that the population was about 10 times what it was before later periods when
It'd be great if somebody like wrote something down, wouldn't it? Like Herodotus did.
So, okay, let me just pause here real quick. So there's a couple things going on here. John, just for a clarifying statement, would you say the Native Americans had no objectively valuable contributions that they gave to early settlers?
So I think that, again, kind of in the dichotomy, there's the two fields of view. There's the Augustine view, which is there's city of God and there's city of man, and one's irredeemable, one's spiritual, and then there's the more the Dante view, which is that there's redeemable aspects and everything. And that's where I would fall. Is that no, of course, I mean, I believe in the common grace of God, right? Which is that even if folks themselves are irredeemed and they haven't been converted, they haven't been saved, that the common grace of God withholds the utter depravity of man and allows for a level of human life and flourishing, for God so loved the world in a general common way, and allowed human beings to flourish, even with or without the gospel. Now, the question is to what extent, and who is God going to bless the most? Where does his anointing rest the most? We talk about, living in the will of God, the grace of God. And when you live in the will of God, when you're obedient to God, human life, that's why he gives his laws, because if you follow these laws, human life is going to get better. So you have the West who follows these laws to the best they can, and human life gets better. I mean, Christians invented hospitals. And you come over to North America, South America, the laws don't even exist here. They've never traveled here. And it's no surprise to me why human life was pre-barbaric. It was Stone Age. It was warmongering, and saying, okay,
it wasn't universally warmongering.
Wait a minute. So
it was universally more.
Earlier when John was speaking, you seemed like you made a face, Chris. I'm curious what that was for, and then we can go back and forth again.
Which piece?
Okay, I didn't get back to the universally warmongering piece, I don't think, which is sad because, and a point that I wasn't as informed, because we got so stuck on like these comparisons of just like history that weren't comparisons of like the core point of there's value in every culture, and that when inhabited with the gospel, every culture will thrive and the image of God will be most vibrantly displayed within every culture and people. And that when we are in heaven, there will be every tongue, tribe, and people visually, distinctly represented. I don't know if it's the clothes people are wearing, the language they're speaking in, or what. But Paul or John, when he has his revelation vision, he sees those people visually distinct in some way, right? That said, the point that I learned post debate is that say some of the plains or North American tribes, there would be raiding parties. That was not uncommon, but large scale social tribe versus tribe warfare, that was comparatively rare compared to the societal scale wars like the 100 Years' War or the 40 Years' War or the Crusades or different stuff that you have in Europe. Those kinds of wars did not happen in much of the Americas. Sometimes, yes, like the Aztecs, sure, they engaged in like large scale warfare, but was it the universal case? No. And like I have tried to emphasize over and over, that's the problem with painting these broad brushes of indigenous peoples as all the same, because they're not. All right, continuing.
Was it? Sorry.
When he originally said, it was something along the same lines of, early life was barbaric. He said that, if I can recall correctly, that God blesses certain acts within culture, something along those lines, and you kind of
okay. Yes. Should we want every culture to be westernized, or every culture to be Christianized, inhabited with the gospel? And is that synonymous? That's the
Western culture, as history has taught us, is a culture influenced and driven by the morality of Christianity. So in that respect, they are synonymous, because wherever Western culture has gone, Christianity has held its hand going there. So again, you can't separate the two, because Western culture was only a irreligious, I shouldn't say irreligious, it was only a non-Christian culture for a handful of centuries in its infancy. And even without Christianity in its infancy, it was teaching Christian values. Again, and I believe as a Calvinist that this was by the sovereignty and the grace of God, as he was setting the stage for what he saw he knew would be an explosion of human life and flourishing throughout the first 2 millennia of the AD.
Sorry to interrupt, John. Sorry. No. So what was your objection to that? Chris, he's made another face.
Okay, so let me tell you about the chieftain of the Taino people when Spain comes in. No, dude, this is history. He is being burned at the stake because they cut off people's hands, did what term would be not banned? Sexually assaulted a bunch of people. And this is recorded by the Spanish, these travesties, so much so that the crown, the people in Spain were getting upset with the things that the Spanish were doing in the Americas. Okay, and it's just since only written record matters. This is written record.
I've never said that.
Okay, since it has primacy or it's more evident. Okay, now a priest, as they're getting ready to burn this guy at the stake, asks him if he wants to become a Christian so he'll go to heaven, and he says, "Will there be Spaniards there?" And he says, "Yes, there will be." And he says, "I would never want to spend eternity with such a cruel people," and they burn him. How that is not furthering of the gospel. That is
what that anecdote does to shift the conversation here.
Because God used the things that the West did in spite of themselves. That's what I'm arguing.
Who ended human sacrifice in Mexico and South America, Central America?
And here we get pulled off again. Like, the point is that people doing things in the name of God does not default make it a win for the gospel. Yes, the West, the Christianity held the hand of the West as it went everywhere, and a lot of what they did actually damaged the perception of the gospel, made it appear as something it was not, because people were seeing actions of the West, not truly of Christianity. But because the West paired them as such that they said they were universally the same, people rejected the gospel and people went to hell or were annihilated, or whatever your belief in within the confines of orthodoxy of Christian afterlife and punishment is. And that's a tragedy, and that isn't yay +1, like yay Western society. That sucks. Like that chieftain should have been told a different gospel than what he was told, not the gospel of Western supremacy. We'll continue.
America.
Cortez and a whole bunch of Native Americans. That's what I'm arguing.
Who ended human sacrifice in Mexico and Central America?
Cortez and a whole bunch of Native American tribes who allied with him.
Right. Would that have ended without Cortez or the Spanish intervention, though?
No, I'm telling you, God used the West in
So
spite of
I'm sorry for Mr. Chief who didn't like Spanish people, but the human sacrifice will end.
So the point there, you couldn't hear it very well. God used the West in spite of themselves, as he also used Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, as he used King Cyrus and Persia, as he used Alexander the Great. God uses all things to accomplish his will. That does not mean that it is within his, like, this is what should have happened, within his, like, good for humanity. He uses brokenness, he uses bad decisions, he makes good of evil. It doesn't mean that evil was God's move, right?
They sacrificed humans also not to idols, but to greed and corporate, like to human capitalism. Like you're equating humans.
What?
Okay, here's the thing: just because you don't have idols, and this is true for.
All right, I misspoke there, and I should have addressed that immediately. Is not capitalism. That's stupid. Capitalism wasn't invented until at least after John Locke stuff in like the late 1700s. Mercantilism is what I meant. But that point stands that the Spanish, okay, they stopped human sacrifice, and then they killed millions of people. Like, okay, cool. You stopped people killing people in one way, and then you killed them in a different way for the purposes of greed to the god of Mammon. Still human sacrifice. It's just not called that. That's the point, and I should have driven that home better and corrected myself in terms of the language I used.
Westerners today.
But I was flustered.
Just because you don't worship physical idols does not mean you don't sacrifice people at the altar of your greed or selfishness or different idols that you've elevated in your life. Like,
oh, hold on. Whoa, we're grabbing the steering wheel and we're yanking. No, focus. What you just said. The Spanish ended human sacrifice in the Americas, and okay, let's say, oh man, they were mean. They were rather spend eternity in hell without Spanish. Okay, womp womp. The human sacrifice ended, and you're saying we should focus on the micro. Well, they didn't do it the right way. Well, they ended it. So I'm looking at.
And then they replaced it with the transatlantic slave trade that killed 2 million to 60 million people.
The Spanish replaced it with the transatlantic slave trade.
No, the Westerners, because you were using
Okay, but now we're Spanish back to the West. Again, stay on target here.
I'm trying to use your broad terms of the West.
Well, no, what you're doing is you're trying to have this argument by dropping all these different pins and then not substantiating any one of them. And then go,
I
look,
substantiated them all with facts.
Can I okay, wait, let's stop for a second. So Chris is saying that you're using certain terms synonymously. Is he correct with that, John?
Again, I don't want to assign meaning to something I've said. I mean what I've said so far. That wherever the West has gone, Christianity has gone with it. So they're not synonymous. Obviously, Christianity is a religion. The West refers to a culture, a movement. The West existed before Christianity did. So they're not synonymous definitionally, but they are synonymous in the observable history we have. And that, again, everywhere the West has gone, Christianity has gone with it. It has improved things. And aspects of Christianity improve things where it went, and aspects of Westernism improve things where it went. They worked together because God ordained it that way throughout human history. And we can sit back like some PBS documentary and point out, well, look, the Spanish guy kicked his dog. Well, I don't care.
No, you can't say kicking dogs. Eradicating an entire people group and shipping them off to the home country as slaves, cutting off hands.
They did that in Mexico City.
Yeah, and the Spanish did this, and the Mexico City people actually didn't.
Cortez imported slaves from Mexico City back to mainland Europe en masse, millions.
No, I'm talking about Hispaniola right now. This is the Taino people were in Hispaniola.
We're switching. Okay, so I'm saying you got to stay one.
Well, that's what I'm trying to tell you. There are countless indigenous people who had countless different encounters with the West, who to various levels were treated with absolute barbarity. And you're saying that the West was superior and that it was a net positive.
It was.
It wasn't for them.
It was. A net positive that's not even an arguable fact. It wasn't net positive for the world. But let me ask.
Sorry,
I mean, the Holocaust was a net positive for Germany.
So okay, I think this is important. This is an important topic. So Chris, I believe, is saying that.
To be fair, that's not really true. Like, it wasn't really a net positive for Germany. It would be viewed as a net positive by some Germans of that time, but obviously was not a net positive for Germany. The point I should have said, viewed as a net positive for Germany.
That we can say that something's net positive in an economic standpoint, but not necessarily in a moral standpoint. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, a net positive for even like God making good out of it in the long run. That doesn't mean it was at all justified or correct or the best optimal path for human flourishing.
You don't think humans being sacrificed to Satan hurt the heart of God?
What if we could have actually gone in and overthrown it and not been engaging in mass?
That's chronological snobbery. You're applying like methodology and humanity that is hundreds of years developed and evolved to a people who didn't have it. So again, I'm asking, you don't
They didn't practice. No, they didn't practice that against other Europeans.
Again, you're answering the question with a question. And they did actually. There's tons of barbars in Europe.
The Spanish didn't practice the same thing against other Europeans.
The Fourth Crusade was horrific. Spaniards, including many other Europeans, raped the city of Constantinople. So yes, Europeans did do it to each other. But
Chris, let John finish. Chris,
I had to let him finish here, but no, they did not. They did not enslave Europeans en masse and ship them to the home country. They didn't. It's just a fact. Did they do bad things? Sure, yes. The sack of Constantinople, not cool. But the racism at play within the way that Europeans treated New World's people was different. Many European states literally had laws that you couldn't enslave other Europeans or other people of a specific, their own nation. Especially, I know specifically that the Scandinavians did. They had some of the first anti-slavery laws that ended slavery in Scandinavia because they weren't allowed to enslave other Danes or Swedes or whatever.
Question. Do you think that the sacrifice of human beings to Satan, because that's what it was Moloch, it was satanic demonic evil, you don't think that practice grieved the heart of God and he sent people to enact his vengeance and his justice against an evil demonic culture?
I do think that practice was ended and was positive and could have been the sovereignty of God. That does not justify everything that was done by the Spanish or the Portuguese in the meantime.
So you won't even say it was the will of God that Cortez ended human sacrifice?
No, I cannot definitively say the way that Cortez engaged was the will of God.
Well, there's no middle ground here. It's either Satan or God.
Well, if all of it was God's will, then God willed for Cortez to sin.
No, God didn't. That's, again, we're talking, there's a difference between the good will of God, the permissible will of God, the perfect will of God. So I would say yes. I think any Christian historian would say that yes, it was the good will of God that Cortez would conquer the Aztecs, would end human slavery, would end that human suffering. And if, again, under his command, thousands of soldiers, some bad things happened, I would say that is not in support of Western culture. That's not propagating Western culture, because you point to these evil, the Holocaust, God, like, all right, high school level arguments here. The Holocaust.
He talks about it, and this is another spot where I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should probably take notes better in debates or whatnot. But what's talked about here, the missed opportunity I had, is like, he's pretending like, okay, people were freed from the Aztecs, no more human slavery, and now they're just like kumbaya thriving. No, they went from one slave master to another, basically. And that's a point that I should have driven home better and did not. I failed to emphasize, just like, what? Like, I should have asked him, and this is where the example of Jesus is helpful. He asked questions, pointed questions a lot of times that force people to face their inconsistencies, right? And so that's a debate tactic that I want to embody better, is just asking pointed questions that force people to address their inconsistencies. So I should have asked John, what was the reality for people who previously were being sacrificed? What was their reality now under the Spanish? Was it better? Were they not also killed? Well, I should have just left it open and then seen what his response was, and then gone on to, okay, was it better? Were they not also killed under these guys? Again, my point here is I had a point. I talked about how, just because you don't label it human sacrifice doesn't mean it's not just continuing human sacrifice under the Spanish. But I didn't tie my points together. Tying your points together, so important. You can have a common thread throughout the debate that helps drive your point home consistently.
Holocaust, is that propagating Western values, or was that in antithesis, in contrast to Western values? People always want to do this. They point out, oh, well, this guy at one point in time did something bad.
Eugenics was a Western value.
What?
Eugenics was a Western value. The whole concept was developed in the West.
Western value. It was,
where does it root in?
I'm not an expert in eugenics. It wasn't Western value. Natural law does not point towards eugenics. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, none of those guys were eugenicists.
It doesn't matter how far the roots go back. The concept of eugenicism was developed in the West.
By the West. Abortion has been industrialized by the West. It's not a Western value.
Yes, abortion was rooted in eugenics, which was rooted in the West, which is why abortion became prominent first in the West.
Rooted in the West. So something starting in the West does not mean it's rooted in Western values. Western values is that all humanity is equally valid. That there's a natural law that protects one man from another because there's a God over both of them. It's natural law. That's Western values. So something is something that violates that natural law just because it originated in the West doesn't make it a Western value. That's like if I went out today and took a gun and shot somebody, you couldn't say that, hey, your mom's values are terrible. Like, what? Well, you came from your mom and you shot. Like, hold on, just because something came from a time and a geographic area does not mean it propagated the values of that region. When Indian tribes, again, I'm not an Indian expert here like you, but when the Comanche traveled roamed the plains after they got horses in about the 1630s from the Spanish, and they basically raped and killed and pillaged everywhere they went. Okay, you're saying, well, that doesn't represent Indian culture. Well, then what does represent Indian?
Well, their victims oftentimes were also native groups. That's what I'm trying to point out. And what of the religious wars in what of the 40 Years' War in Europe? Like you're ignoring tragedies that happen simultaneously.
I just explained the tragedies. I said that tragedies happen everywhere because humanity is fallen. But again, you want to zoom into the micro and say, look, these guys farmed with fish, and the Iroquois Confederacy talked to Ben Franklin, and that's all fine and dandy. Again, yeah, there are redeemable things in evil cultures. So that's Joseph. That's the good of God happening despite the evil humanity of man. What I'm saying is back it up. What's the net positive? Would humanity be better off under an Indian society, under an Indian culture doing rain dances, or would humanity be better off under a Western society teaching natural law, teaching submission?
Okay, let's Chris, go ahead and flesh out your thoughts.
Would humanity be better off with a Native American culture that was inhabited by the gospel and transformed through it and not eradicated?
I agree. Indian culture would be better off permeated by the gospel, which is what the West did.
Okay, well, the schools in which they intentionally destroyed people's Native American culture and won't let them speak in their home language and such, that's not really inhabiting the culture of the gospel.
And go give them a lecture on 21st century humanities and sensibilities, but what happened. Here's the thing. We got the gospel.
I'm not saying I'm not saying that everyone of all history needs to adhere to 21st century moral standards as we've grown into. What I am saying is you can't, from 21st century, point back and say, well, those things were good. They were justified. They worked out because
I didn't think they were good or justified. There's some tremendous evils the West has perpetrated. And what I'm saying is they didn't perpetrate those evils out of their own values.
You said in your original video that it was good that Native American culture was eradicated.
Culture, yes.
Yes. And I am saying that it had value. Two, most of the points made were not accurate. Animism wasn't even practiced by a wide variety of
what was the value of Indian culture?
It depends on the aspect you're talking to. They had various technologies that they contributed. They had a very communal culture.
You named 2 technologies.
And again, this is different groups. Yes, because terrace farming was huge. That's what I'm trying to communicate. It doesn't matter the array of different technologies. These are people who didn't have livestock and who didn't have various natural resources. So no, they didn't have swords. They had obsidian. Like you're comparing apples to oranges here.
No, not really. You don't need pack animals to smelt iron. You need a furnace.
And the root materials. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a whole list of different things that you need to get to different technologies.
They didn't do any of it.
And they had different kinds of technologies. They had entirely different agriculture and infrastructure and buildings and such that supported a population, like these populations that rivaled Western. Now, other aspects of culture you can talk about too. Cleanliness. Like, okay, let's talk about how they had poop in the streets all across Europe.
Let's talk about how the Romans invented the sewer system.
Yeah, okay, but that wasn't all across Western society.
It was all across the Roman Empire, which was, for the large point in human history, Western society.
Yeah, and what I'm telling you is these elements of different technologies don't denote a cultural superiority.
Then what does?
The actual cultural practice. Culture is not even defined by technology, largely.
No, it's not. But technology is a fruit.
Okay. Man, I got flustered here. At any point, I could have said, I'm not an expert on the wide array of technologies, but I've given you some. I've demonstrated how the degree of technologies they had contributed to an roughly equitable quality of life to that experience in Europe at this time. And that could have been the end of this weird measurement game, comparison game of one-offs of tech. And I get sucked into this here, and it ruins, like, in my opinion, like 20-30 minutes of the debate, because we're doing these one-offs that really have no value. It kind of ends to some degree some of the value of the conversation. Don't get flustered in debate. Don't get drawn into side tangents like this, because he really wanted to win that tech piece, which I stand by everything I said, but I should have just admitted where the end of my knowledge came. And that's important for us all to remember. It's like when you don't know something, just say, look, here's what I know, which is some in terms of technologies. I know the result of this. Here's the extent, like here's the end of my knowledge. And that's fine. That's fine. And you can leave it there. And then you can progress into better parts of conversation rather than getting stuck just trying to argue points that don't even matter.
Fruit of a culture, it's a fruit of a civilization.
No, I mean, yes, of a civilization, but...
So, okay. Let me just real quick. So,
can I define culture?
Yeah, I think that's basically what I was going to get at.
Culture, the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. You're looking at the achievements of the West and comparing them to the lowest or worst of the New World and saying that there's
the New World. And so far, you've come up with farming and putting a fish on a piece of corn. I'm like, if there's something out there I'm missing, please point me to it.
There's wigwams, there's the cultural practice. Dude, here's the thing. This is what I'm trying to tell you.
Wait a minute.
You don't...
Misspoke. For one, I meant to say like the longhouses of the Iroquois people and like the respectable way in which like they made small towns like with different infrastructure. I am flustered here and say something stupid, and here's why it matters that you don't get drawn into these like one-offs. Is he's being pedantic in minimizing the extremely impressive technological advancements that I've talked about. Putting fish on a stick. Like, no, it's called fertilizer. And I should have just held him to that. Like, no, you're not being honest in your representation of these things that I've said. I shouldn't have gone, trying to make more up in my list. I should have said, hey, why am I going to list more when you're not even honestly representing the technologies I have listed so far? It's not fish on a stick. It's called fertilizer. And it's a modern, like, it's something necessary for feeding all of the people in the world today. We couldn't feed everyone alive in the world today without fertilizer. And it's the way that Westerners survived as they came to North America, was Native Americans teaching them fertilizing techniques. Boom, bada bing, bada boom. You don't got to get into a listing other things game. That's what I should have done. That is not what I did. And I get embarrassed for it.
Have the same degree of massive social scale warfare across the Americas as
Yes,
well, the North America as
Yes,
we
you
progress through.
there's a fantastic book. It's called, I can't remember the author, but it's called just Debunking the Myth of the Noble Savage. And
No,
using,
we talked about the Noble Savage.
using archaeological evidence, there have been enormous battlefields discovered all over North America. From the arrowheads, they're made of stone, not metal, because they deteriorate. We can find these enormous battlefields all across North America. So, wars happened en masse.
Wars did happen.
Yeah,
People were not as obsessed with killing in mass, which might be part of why they didn't develop such weapons that could kill at such
You can't
levels.
say that.
One moment, guys. Gentlemen, one moment.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what would you say is the best measure of success for a culture? Would you say it's their
Human
achievements
well-being.
or overall success?
Overall well-being of people.
And so would you say that the Native Americans' overall well-being was superior to that of the Western culture?
I would say there were aspects that weren't. I think their social hierarchies were amazing. I think
Oh,
if we
come on,
could.
man. Make it
So,
sense.
so wait a minute.
That was a perfect opportunity missed to just reiterate superior is the wrong measure. All culture has value, all cultures have strengths, all cultures have weaknesses. All cultures, through cultural exchange, can learn from each other's strengths and learn from each other's weaknesses. Measuring in terms of superiority or value as this weird yardstick is subjective in the first place, because everyone's going to elevate their culture as the superior one or better one, as we have a Westerner here arguing for Western supremacy, and it's just the wrong categorization to use. Missed opportunity because I was coming off of being flustered, and this is but I did make I'm not saying my point wasn't valid, but I had an opportunity to succinctly restate my thesis.
Okay, the Iroquois Confederacy was entirely
They didn't
advanced.
exist
for
until
the
the
I think there's a core issue here.
11th.
One moment, guys.
No,
There's a
no,
core
no.
issue here, guys. So, Chris, you're saying that while there are merits to both cultures, you feel that there could be some type of integration that could have or should have taken place to
That's the
I would
ideal.
say-
That's not going to happen in history, but that's
Right.
the ideal that we should, one, wish for history, and two, wish for ourselves going forward.
But do you, in one sense, do you agree with John in that Western culture, based on its achievements, has some superiority to Native American culture?
I think superiority is not the right word. I think
Okay.
that Western culture brought proper, superior technologies, but culture involves far more than technology. It involves art. It involves social expression, customs, and that I wouldn't say that Western culture was inherently superior in things
Gotcha.
like art, expression, social hierarchies, etc.
Oh, come on, man.
Gosh dang it, I was muted. I was flustered because of not right now, but in that video I was flustered because the whole wigwams thing's still in my mind. What I should have said is that the West was, the West brought technologies of value to the indigenous peoples, and through cultural exchange gained technologies and knowledge of value from indigenous peoples. That's how cultural exchange works. It is never a one-way street, and it never should be. And when it is attempted to be forced to be a one-way street, there is a lot of human suffering and not good stuff that happens. So I basically conceded his point without meaning it, but I was so flustered at this point that that's what happened.
Let me, John, I'm trying to help you out here. So, I think that
That's part of culture.
So, if I'm trying to understand you, Chris, your pushback is that it's more the terminology of superiority, and you feel as though there was a huge moral error in claiming that there was no value in Native American culture. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, pointing to the worst aspects of individual indigenous groups' cultural practices and universally applying them in contrast to the best aspects of Western cultural practices, which had plenty of flaws of their own, is my big problem here.
So, what would you say? How do you feel like we reconciled that issue based on just our unbiblical understanding of how things should have taken place, right? Because I think at the end of the day, the gripe here is that we probably could have did a better job representing Christianity if Western culture is synonymous somehow in some ways with Christianity. Am I representing you right, John?
Yeah,
I was just saying, did I represent your position well, John? Or?
To represent my position, yeah, you did a decent job. What Chris is saying is that, and it's fair. I think it's this misunderstanding of my position. He's saying that I'm comparing the worst of Indian culture to the best of Western culture, and if I was doing that, that certainly would not be a fair thing to do. What I'm saying is that when the West did evil things, it did it in contradiction and violation of its own values. It didn't do it in propagation of its own values. The Holocaust occurred in the West by a Western guy who was trained by the West. That didn't support or propagate or go forth or spread Western values. It completely violated all of them. So Indian culture, when it did bad things, it did it in support of its own. It propagated its own culture.
I find that to be a very flawed logical argument.
Well, what's the actual law?
Hitler would have said this is the apex of Western culture.
That Hitler doesn't define Western culture. He's one guy. What's the natural
Why
law?
do you?
I don't do it either. I define Western culture by the fathers of Western culture, by the great men who've come and pushed it forward, pushed it along. I'm not defining it.
Who would widely disagree with each other also, as they did in their
really.
times.
No, Cicero would be hand in hand with Socrates, and they were 500 years apart. And then you had the Great Enlightenment. There's a lot of postmodernism that birthed itself in the Great Enlightenment, but these guys were hand in hand. Aquinas was hand in hand with the thinkers of the turn of the century. These guys, they took each other's ideas. The whole point of the Renaissance, ad fontes, was returning to the sources and rediscovering these things and then building upon them. So none of these guys didn't disagree with each other. They all agreed with each other, thousands of years apart. And
Augustine disagreed strongly with Plato and Manichaeans.
Great. They still took each other's ideas and they built upon them. And they might not have agreed
Which
with
is what Hitler would have said he was doing.
Okay, so we can all point to Hitler like it's 8th grade and we're trying to win an argument. But what I'm asking for here is, again, when the West does bad things, it does them in violation of its own values.
No one who does them would say that.
Hitler doesn't define. Of course they would, because nobody's going to raise their hand and say, I'm going to be an evil guy today. Everyone thinks they're the superhero. We can, as a society, look at the actions and the fruit of an individual and judge the actions and the fruits of that individual, which society has done in the case of the Holocaust. Hitler doesn't individually, autocratically define for the world what Western values are. The West as a
Bingo.
whole gets to do that. And
Neither does Tenochtitlan.
Wait a minute.
Neither do the Aztecs. You made my point. The Aztecs do not define all indigenous culture.
So who does?
Actually, the Iroquois
So who
Confederacy
does?
can define their culture.
No, the Iroquois. Okay. Who does?
No.
Fine.
That's what I'm saying. You're taking the worst of, you can deny it, but you're taking the worst of Native American indigenous cultures, individualized, and making this unique Western culture where it's only the good elements of Western culture are descriptive of it, and no one who said anything or did anything bad in the name of Western culture ever was truly West. I'm blanking on what the name of that is, but they're not really. That's a logical.
The term I was looking for and could not find in my mind was the no true Scotsman fallacy. And this is a classic example of it. So it's on me to just remember my fallacy and logic terminology better, because I should have, like, if I could have had that phrase, would have been sweet. Would have been a good moment for it.
Fallacy.
No, I see how you're getting there. And let me point out your misunderstanding here, because I'm not pointing out the worst in Indian culture. I am certainly doing some of that. And then I'm saying that the best they had to offer was moccasins and wigwams. I'm like, okay.
The best they had to offer was taking full advantage of the resources they had available. Like, look at their use of the bison. Look at their use of different raw resources.
They did.
At very low waste.
Let's look at their use of raw resources. They were in the Stone Age as the rest of the world was in the early modern period.
Various groups were in what you might call the Stone Ages.
Most of them were. Almost all of them were. The Incas, the Aztecs were the only ones in the Bronze Age. They were the only ones smelting metal. And that's observable history, because the West, when it came there, observed the technological level of the people they were interacting with. And the only group that was firmly in the Bronze Age, as in, like, they had finally caught up with the ancient Egyptians, were the Aztecs. The rest
Measuring by technological advantage.
Again, this is where I miss a point because of just the end of my knowledge. The Incas actually had metallurgy and metalworking. Metallurgy had been around for centuries in South America, of copper and bronze and stuff. No, not steel, but yes, working metals, and had made its way up to the Aztecs. Again, though, this is like semantics. It's really not the core point anyways. But again, should have been like, I don't know that that's true, but this is not like the point here.
Advancement again. And what drives technological advancement?
Culture.
Necessity.
No, culture.
No, I'd very strongly disagree.
Well, okay, we're not going to start a whole separate philosophical conversation.
They had no necessity for these technological advancements because their quality of life
for
was fine.
roots, for structures that are made out of things besides leads, for arrows that are made out of metal.
Do you know what a longhouse is? These are not. There is no need.
They didn't have a necessity for tools made out of metal.
No, you could say medicine. Maybe they had.
Hold on. They didn't have a necessity for tools made out of metal.
Obviously not. They had a very high population culture.
Yeah.
I try not to be pedantic. I always go into things trying to think of this will be like a scholarly academic conversation. We're both searching for truth, trying to come to the truth and understand it. This was a good opportunity to be, I think, wisely a little pedantic and be like, do you know what obsidian is? Let me tell you. Because it does most of what metal tools did for Europeans. Like, a Spanish explorer recounted a time that an Aztec warrior cut a horse's head off with an obsidian laced club, because what's it called, I don't know how to pronounce it, but they had these instead of swords. It's just apples to oranges, and blaming the oranges for making orange juice and being mad that it's not apple juice. It's just two different things.
Aztecs apparently did, because they discovered it.
Yeah, okay. But what I'm telling you is the reason population matters. So let me make this point very succinctly. The reason population matters is because it points to a culture and civilization's ability to thrive, right? To have good quality of life, be desiring to procreate, be successfully able to procreate, and sustain life at high populations, right? That's why I keep bringing up the population size of the Hoika and Tenochtitlan and other places.
Your guess is at the population size. Yeah.
Well, the consensus view among archaeologists.
Observable.
It's consensus view among a very well-established science.
Nobody's ever seen a dinosaur.
Anyway, well, I hope we're not denying dinosaurs exist because we haven't written them down or existed. But I don't know, maybe. But
Wait, I need to know this.
Yeah.
Do you deny that dinosaurs exist, John?
No, I have this whole goofy debate with my brother.
Okay.
Where we've never actually discovered like a full complete dinosaur skeleton, and all the dinosaur skeletons we have are basically just like Lego sets that archaeologists have put together. So we really, I think they were dinosaurs. We just have they look nothing like.
Thank God. I hope he's not a dinosaur denier. I love Marty.
I met them.
Yeah, no, there's not slide.
I'm just playing. All right, so yeah, Chris, go ahead and finish your thought, and then we'll do some final statements so that we can just keep it on
Yeah,
time here.
all that to say why I'm nailing the aspect of population so much, and why the difference I think in how we define cultural value is I look at human well-being and flourishing, and does the population have what it needs to succeed, propagate life, and live good lives at large scale? If so, add technology into the equation if you want. It's going to be some net positives, some net negatives. I don't think the aspects of like I read recently that scientists tried to do a study on microplastics in men's reproduction organs, and every single person had these microplastics because they couldn't find someone to compare against that doesn't have
What
this.
does that have to do with
And
this?
so what I'm talking about is you're saying like advancement is always good, always better.
No, I never said that.
Okay, we are presenting technological advancement as a strict positive, and I'm saying technology comes with pluses and negatives, and people's cultural value should not be assessed based on their technology. Actually, to me at all.
So what you're arguing for then is the noble savage myth, where just, they didn't have technology, but they were happy and they got along and they had great societies.
I'm saying they had functioning societies that functioned as well or better than Western.
No, that's not provable in any way.
I mean, it depends on how you measure it. If you measure it by
flourishing, they didn't have hospitals, they didn't have just legal systems, they didn't have any kind of medical technology to speak of. You talk about step farming and putting, again, you give me 3 technological advancements. You give me wigwams, step farming, and a fish on a piece of corn. Okay, the West was feeding millions, tens of millions of people. So congratulations.
Dude, their agriculture enabled them to support 3 times the population. There's a whole lot of technologies. I didn't come to this expecting to discuss technology.
Agricultural methods that the Indians might have developed in their own areas to support cities of a few tens of thousands. Meanwhile, the West was doing the same thing with millions of people. With and without step farming, congratulations, millions of people. They were supporting a far, far greater population, designing far, far greater things to support human life. Unfortunately, you talked about European cities with human waste in the street. The West invented sewers.
How about rubber?
What?
How about rubber? Does rubber have value for Western technology and society? Because it came from Native Americans and brought it back to Spain.
Again, this is how you've made your argument this entire time, is you've picked out like a handful, like the 5 things you can think of that come from Indians. Like, oh, look at these great things, moccasins. And I'm like, great, I would need several hours to do that with the West. If you wanted me to go through every advancement.
And again, like that, this is a mistake on my part. I start kind of one-offing these things because I'm just annoyed at this part by his denial of the facts. I should have just held him to the fire on the denial of the facts of like, no, the West adopted like different crops from like potatoes from the Americas for a reason. Have you ever heard of the potato famine? Like the Irish potato famine. The facts are not aligned with what he had said just now, and I should have confronted that rather than just continuing the stupid line of thought. I'm not saying he's stupid. I'm just saying the line of conversation that results for like 5 minutes here is just stupid.
Technological, historical art. You want to talk about art? Take cave drawings or the art that you see in the Louvre. It would take me hours to go through that. It would take.
What about syringes?
What?
Syringes.
Okay, again, I'm not going to go one by one because you're going to lose this argument.
This is what I'm trying to talk about is you are saying you're taking the Western technologies that they had and applying them as universally better than all of the. We could go one by one for literally forever.
For about an hour, then you run out.
Let me stop you right there, Chris. I'm not sure that's what he's saying. I feel like John is saying that we have a much greater quantity of net positives from Western culture than we can see in Native American culture. If we're comparing quantity.
And I just don't believe that.
Read your history book, dude. I hate to say it. Look, at the end of it, you have an answer for me because you said I can point to a moral standard in the West. I can say yes, the West's moral standards are based off of these principles. And post Jesus, it was Christianity, and then post Edict of Milan, it was objectively Christianity was the moral foundation for the West. So you say, well, it's just a bunch of people getting together, and who's to say? Christians, God is to say, because again, post Edict of Milan, the faith of the West was Christianity. So anyone had a qualm, morally speaking, they could point to Scripture. Before that, they would point to natural law and they would have a debate. But post Milan, post Constantine, they would point to Scripture. And you're saying, so what's the best of Indian culture? You're like, well, these guys had this, and these guys had this, and these guys had this. And what you're doing is the opposite, the inverse of what you're saying I'm doing. You're picking out these individual onesie twosie good things that you're finding in Indian culture, and you're saying, look, these individual microcosms, these exceptions to the rule, redeem an entire culture.
There's no reason to think they're exceptions to the rule.
They are exceptions. They're historically objectively exceptions to the rule.
Chris,
they're verifiably exceptions to the rule.
Excuse me, Chris, are you saying that the success of the Native American culture is more of a subjective? So, like, if we're measuring what is success, it's more of a subjective. Like, success in itself is more subjective, right?
It is subjective, and the population totals of the time point to sanitization, point to like there are so many things that you need to have these population centers that you had in parts of the Americas that you did not have largely in the West. It's comparing apples to oranges and saying oranges are better because you can make orange juice out of them.
I can go to Italy and I can look at Roman aqueducts and I can look at Roman sewage systems because they're still there 1,500 years later because the Romans invented concrete. You are saying that these archaeological evidences that suggest the population maybe was this big, then further suggests that they probably had sanitation. And I'm saying you can go to the West and just poke it. It's still there. So yeah, we are comparing apples to oranges because you're looking at it, whether or not you're going to admit it or not, what you're doing here non-verbally is propagating noble savage myth. And you're saying that these people, even though they objectively lived in the Stone Age, even pro-Native American culture, advocates, they lived in the Stone Age. That's undeniable. Only a handful of tribes had even gotten to the point of smelting iron, which is like 2000 BC for the West, not for the West, but for the rest of the world, because Western meant they're objectively in the Stone Age. And you're saying that but they were happy in the Stone Age. I'm like, yeah, okay. Europe was happy when they were in the Stone Age.
Their technologies were driven by different necessities, is what I'm saying. If you want to talk, if we named ages in terms of agricultural advancement, then they might be in a higher age. We are defining ages by a Western perspective of materials developed.
No, but that's technological, moral, and cultural advancement. And so you talk about necessity of invention. Did Indian tribes have no necessity for modern healthcare? Did they have no necessity for?
We didn't have modern healthcare in that time in the West. They still did bloodletting back then.
Modern, as we find now, and then in 1,000 years, we'll look at this time of healthcare as ancient. No, they didn't have modern healthcare because modern healthcare in 1450 was bloodletting. Modern healthcare in 1450 was this list of things. They didn't have that. Again, they were still 2,000, 3,000 years prior to that.
And it wasn't a plus. the healthcare in the time of the Native Americans and the West meeting was no better in the West than it was.
No, that's verifiably false. They had hospitals in the West. People survived illnesses in the West. They had some grasp, some basic understanding of disease in the West. They had none of that in North America.
This is just like another spot where it's like, you know, things about the fallacy that he falls to here is he knows Western history and he knows nothing of indigenous history. And I didn't make this point, like another missed point, and so many lessons learned here. But Native Americans had herbal remedies. They had different treatments for different things. To pretend like they knew nothing of medication is just silly. They had, you know, different plants that they used as pain relievers. Like, it's just silly to imagine that they knew nothing of medicine or different medical treatment for anything at all, because they had hospitals in Europe. Okay.
They thought, you know, somebody got sick, it was because they stepped on a daffodil and they pissed off someone's ancestor. That's not how it worked.
They put poisoning on their faces. They put poison on their faces as makeup in the West. Like,
okay, we're not getting into these onesie twosie examples. You won't step out to the macro, and I know why you won't, because you can't defeat the macro on any kind of debate that makes sense.
the macro defined as what?
The one, like, here again, I should have paused. I go into like the macro defined as what, but I should have said like these onesie twosie examples defeat your point. The purpose of them is to show, like, you're talking about, like, he's almost presenting the West as universally, as if we had modern medicine back then. And the point I was making, again, this is the mistake I continue to make, is I make these points quickly and I don't elaborate on them. Like, okay, so they're putting poison on their faces as makeup in the West. Like, they're doing plenty of things that are scientifically foolish that we know in retrospect, that are not being done, say, you could say even in China or India or among indigenous peoples. Like, the point being, I should have made my point, is that you can't say, oh, they had hospitals, so they were smarter when it came to medicine and health. Like, no. Like, what he's using the one-off example of hospitals existing as the point, and I'm just trying to elaborate why that doesn't equate to superior health, even in health and medicine in the West versus anywhere else, really. I don't think medicine was superior in the West. I could be wrong on this, but I don't think it was superior in the West to most places in the world until, like, the Industrial Revolution, like until around the time of when we discovered, like, germs were a thing and stuff like that. But I don't know. That point I could be wrong on. But anyways, continuing.
The macro defined as Western society, Western culture being a superior culture. And you can go, oh, superior, that sounds scary, I don't like white supremacy, whatever that has to do with it. But
I mean, Western supremacy is the argument of white supremacy, but...
No, it's okay. Gosh, this is
You brought it up.
No, this is what leftists and progressives do. They make everything a racist thing. They make everything a moral thing so that they can win on a moral high ground. Western culture, Western society, objectively. Culture is not subjective. Culture is objective. You said that in your last statement. It's verifiably false. It's objectively false. Culture is not a subjective thing. You can't look at two cultures and say, well, I like this one better, so it is better. No, it's not how this works.
Aspects. Culture is made up of so many different parts.
Great. Aspects. Which culture has done better for humanity as a whole?
Well, West is actually still around, so you can't really...
Correct. You can't. Which is the entire point of my video that you seem to disagree so much with. The West has done better for humanity as a whole.
Dude, here's why that argument is so flawed.
This is my, like, the sad thing is, this is an hour and 8 minutes into the debate. But this is the best point I make in the whole debate. And it kills me because I'm like, man, no one's going to watch this video. Very few people watch this video the full hour and a half that it lasts. But, oh, I wish they'd gotten to this, because this is chef's kiss.
You're arguing that any group that's been eradicated throughout history has contributed less cultural value to the others. Yes. So you could say the Gauls didn't contribute, like, cultural value because in 300 BC, 200, I think it was 200 BC, Julius Caesar killed 1 million of them and enslaved them and, like, destroyed.
So what do we still benefit from in 2024?
Let's just make sure we don't cut each other off too much, okay? Just want to step in. Let's let each other breathe a second.
What do we still benefit from? I don't want to talk about Hannibal and Gauls and Carthage. Okay. What do we still benefit from in 2024, culturally speaking? Not, oh, we found rubber in a tree in Mexico. That's not their culture. What do we still benefit from, culturally speaking? What has Indian culture done for humanity as a whole?
The U.S. Constitution.
What?
The U.S. Constitution.
That's not humanity. That's one nation, and they didn't write the Constitution. Okay,
it's largely informed by the Iroquois. This is the whole thing.
That's right. Ben Franklin asked an Iroquois guy what he thought about the Constitution, and that's all of Indians, millions across.
Yes, this is a contribution from the indigenous peoples to Western society. They unfortunately didn't get to contribute a whole lot because they were wiped out in mass.
Hold on. So you're
blaming them for being destroyed, which you said was a positive, not genocide, but you said the destruction of the culture was a positive in your original video.
Hold on. I'm not victim blaming anyone.
No, not victim blaming. You're saying you're saying obviously Western culture was better because it contributed more. When I'm telling you, well, of course it contributed more because the alternative was destroyed.
No, I'm not. I'm saying values. Look, values and morality and things like that survive. We still have, according to you, archaeological evidence of all these different things. So what I'm asking you, you said that culture can be weighed on the merits of what it does for human life and flourishing. It benefits if it lifts it up or if it pulls it down. Right? I'm paraphrasing it here. And what I'm asking is, what has Indian culture done to lift up humanity as we now know it? And the best you came up with is Ben Franklin talked to an Iroquois.
As we now know it is not the measure, as it was then. Because as we now know it, it didn't get to go to now. That's the whole point of this conversation.
So now
Native American culture didn't get to go to the modern day. In large part, there are still indigenous groups that preserve their culture in some ways.
And what if they had been allowed to flourish in another 4,000 years? They might have invented a toaster. I mean, come on, dude. You're saying,
look at the Cherokee people before the Trail of Tears. They had an alphabet. They had schools. They were very well educated. They were thriving.
Schools.
Who brought them schools? They developed them largely on their own.
No, they didn't. Nothing was
in tandem with the West, but these were owned by. Okay. These were owned by, and the alphabet was developed by Cherokee man.
I'm not here to try to prove you wrong or to dunk on the libs. All I'm asking is, because the whole point of my video was that Western society, Western culture, Western as an identity, has done far objectively the best for humanity, and that Indian culture has objectively, observably done nothing good for us. And you disagreed with that, but you haven't provided me. And the best argument you come up with so far is Ben Franklin talked to an Iroquois, and if we hadn't intervened, then they would have come up with something.
Well, yeah, we only have a very small handful of examples because the vast majority of them were not allowed to contribute. They were wiped out. They were pushed off. Look at the Trail of Tears. Like, did we go to the Cherokee and be like, hey, we really want you to participate in our new nation, and you can have a Cherokee state here, and you'll contribute your different cultural ideas and understandings of society? No, we kicked them out and sent them to Oklahoma.
Yeah, the West is evil. Okay, the West is a lot of bad things for you. Great, put that all in the box.
We didn't let them contribute. You're arguing
sure,
against.
We didn't. Genocide. All that. Put that in the box. Set it over here. The emotionalism argument, right? We'll set it over here.
It's not emotionalism. It is a fact. We didn't let them
contribute. Trying to invoke emotion in the listener. We did bad things. That's you should feel bad. It is emotional. Okay.
No, I want to say about the fact is we did not let them contribute.
Great, I agree. For the sake of this, 100%. Set that aside. They weren't allowed to. Whatever. The reason they didn't build spaceships is because of the West. Great. They still didn't build the spaceships. So looking at historical fact now, observable history, the reasons why terrible, awful. Okay. What happened though? And what you're saying is, yeah, you're right, but
no, I'm not saying that. We're entering into alternate history, mythology, imagination.
You're the one doing that. You're the one saying if they intervened, they'd be on the moon.
Because what would have happened if the Taino people hadn't been eradicated, had their hands chopped off, jumped off cliffs to try to avoid the Spaniards?
Crazy. I had no idea. It didn't happen though. So
because you're saying, okay. Here's the line. I'm trying to figure out how to communicate this effectively. If you go and kill someone right now, and in 20 years you invent something, and you say, that person I killed never could have invented this. They were such a sucker. Like, that's what you're saying.
No, it's not.
They never would have. They never would have invented this.
No, I didn't say they wouldn't. I didn't say
they didn't invent this. They didn't invent this. They didn't contribute to society.
Using your analogy, if I killed someone today, and then in 10 years I invented the cure for cancer, it would be a completely fair, accurate statement to say that person I killed 10 years ago did not invent the cure for cancer, and I did, because they have nothing to do with each other. What you're saying is, if they hadn't been killed, they might have invented the cure for cancer. Oh, great. Maybe they would have. Maybe they would have done even better than that. Who knows? I'm not saying the Indians couldn't have. Give them another 3,000 years, they might have made it to like the postmodern period. Who knows? We don't, because it never happened. Because the world was moving along and had gotten to a point where, hey, there's all this undeveloped agriculture, this untouched land, and humanity is growing and needs more room to live. So we're going to come here to all these untapped resources and we're going to develop. Okay.
It wasn't untapped land.
It was completely untapped. So,
okay, guys, yeah, this is really, honestly, I wish we could keep going. Unfortunately, I do need to wrap up.
It is unfortunate that this is where things had to end because kind of had him here, in my opinion. I mean, look at the century of humiliation in China, right? Where Great Britain flooded China with opium, with drugs, and subsequently basically like destabilized and destroyed their society and went to war to force China to enable them to continue drugging their people and their population, and just circulating drugs all within their people, massively violating their sovereignty. I mean, we could go on and on. China was a powerhouse up until this point. Who knows what China may have accomplished? Who knows if the rise of communism under Mao Zedong would have ever happened? We might have a vibrant, beautiful, thriving China if not for that. I think in the future we will bear the repercussions and consequences of our ancestors' actions, sadly, that led to that century of humiliation. You can't ignore the negative repercussions of Western society and the way in which we have prevented other societies of the world from cultural contribution by methods of force and domination, and now are doing so less. But this is our history that we have to reckon with, that we have to make sense of, that we have to figure out how to move forward best in light of. And I wish I had touched on that point earlier. I wish that we'd gotten into that earlier, because I think that's a huge point to be dive into further. It's just like, you can't say like, well, what did X group contribute to today, when they weren't allowed to survive or thrive or share their culture in mass to today, because they were subjugated and even killed off. Anyways, let's wrap this thing up.
I'd like to give you both the opportunity to just share like final statements, and you know, if you guys want to duke out in your own DMs after this, that'd be great.
Okay.
But this, I mean, for me, this has been really enlightening and educational. I don't really have a position dog in this fight, so that's why I really wanted to hear both of your more fleshed out statements. I'll give you both 5 minutes on the clock if that's okay.
Yeah,
And
Chris, you want the last word?
I'll go first. I've just got
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to take it to like the modern day, like how this, why this matters, like how I feel this informs our about. I say I do not think that the maximal human flourishing is GDP, productivity, economic growth. And I think the fact that we measure such society, and this is against, I'm not saying you define this. I'm trying to make a societal statement. The reason or the ways in which we measure positive human flourishing today are oftentimes very flawed. I think that we measure it by economic productivity and such, and we're on this inevitably going to crash kind of course towards like always has to grow, always has to grow, always has to grow. And I think human flourishing much better is in homeostasis and kind of finding stable environments, a stable understanding of society, and contributing growth and increasing human flourishing. But also like there's total value in just like culture and human flourishing just on its own. Like you can reach a spot that's good, that you don't necessarily got to change a whole lot. And that aside, I think every culture is better when inhabited by the gospel and not eradicated by people in the name of the gospel. And I think every culture with that, so in the New Heavens, New Earth, we'll have every tongue, tribe, and nation, right? And so I think that's super important. I think that's part of God's design of cultural diversity and stuff, is that his intent has always been to redeem every culture of the world to himself, to inhabit the gospel through them, and to express his will for humanity uniquely through all of them. And as Christians, I would hope that our desire in society is just to live good, happy, flourishing lives, to display the gospel to others, and to appreciate the multiculturalism and diversity of thought, experience, practice that God has blessed us all with and allows us to express in him.
You got 2 minutes 45 seconds left. You good?
Sure, but yeah, I don't mind. That's kind of like my summaries of like why I just want to make a kind of parting message as to why I think this matters.
Okay, cool. And just to clarify for the audience, Chris, are you a filthy lib?
I'm not. I voted for Romney in 2012, and 2016 I voted third party. So like, and then 2020 I voted
That's
for
just
the old
something.
guy. But
Sounds like a liberal to me. I don't know about you.
I'm probably gonna vote for RFK this
Reset
year.
the time.
Again, that should tell you something.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right, John, you got 5 minutes.
Yeah, so my argument from the beginning has been that there is observable value.
And if you want to see John's argument, I mean, this is about kind of self-critique and stuff. If you want to see John's argument, you can go check it out. But we'll go ahead and wrap up the stream there, I think. And thank you to everyone who joined or who watches this in post. Feel free to leave comments, either critiquing or agreeing or whatever. Always open to some critiques, and hope I can learn alongside you guys. But thanks for joining. You guys have a great rest of your day.
I guess I'm not saying you define this. I'm trying to make a societal statement. The reason
critiques and hope I can learn alongside you guys. But thanks for joining. You guys